You're watching CTOM TV. Knowledge is power.
To me, I want to talk about what I feel is most important in brain tumors.
Okay.
So, glioblastomas typically occur in the oligocells and the astrocytes. And GBM, it's called glioblastoma multiforme, is a composite of different cell types.
Okay.
So the important thing to understand is there's two types of GBM.
Okay.
And GBMs can be either what we call primary or secondary. And so in primary, there's no evidence of the tumor throughout the person's life, and they just occur at a certain point in time. And they mainly affect elderly people. They happen, much later on in life. Primary occur in about 90% of the cases of GBM.
Okay.
So if you're, older than 50, typically it's going to be a primary. If you're under 50, then it's going to be what we call a secondary. And so the way we really determine the difference there is we look at the genetic features that are unique to them. And these genetic features are prognostic and can also determine what treatments are going to work best for a person.
Okay.
So in primary, we see a lot of something called a loss of heterozygosity in an area of chromosome 10q. That occurs in about 70% of cases.
Okay. What kind of test would I be using to find that?
That would be genetic sequencing.
Okay, back to genetic sequencing.
Yes.
Okay.
We also see something called EGFR amplification. That means multiple copies of the EGFR gene.
Okay.
That happens about 36%, 40%. We see loss of tumor suppressor genes such as P10 and P16 4A. And then we also see something called promoter methylation of MGMT. And we'll get into that in a bit. Whereas secondary, what these are is brain tumor develops typically prior to puberty. It occurs early on, and these children get a lot of migraines and headaches. So if you have a child that is getting migraines and headaches, get them tested, get an MRI, really have them checked out, because it can be a sign of the start of a brain tumor. Because this is one of the things that is very, very common. Whenever I speak with someone who has a secondary GBM, they always say, I had horrendous headaches, and they just stopped as soon as I hit puberty. And so for some reason, what happens is the precursor cells, which are usually called glioma cells, start developing a tumor at a young age, and then they just stop growing. And they don't grow again until later on. And that is why we call it a secondary, because it started growing and then it stopped, died, can sometimes shrivel up, and then it comes back later on as a more aggressive variant.
Do you know what makes it come back?
Well, we know that they tend to stop around puberty, and so there's got to be some sort of hormonal basis to it.
Sure.
I don't know. We don't have those answers. Okay. What we do know is they typically progress from what we call low-grade diffuse astrocytomas or anaplastic astrocytomas. They manifest in younger people under 50. Okay. One of the common features of these is what we call a P53 mutation. Happens about 60%. And then there's a heterozygosity loss again of this 10q25 region that is also found in primary. And then they typically progress from a lower grade. So glioblastomas are considered grade 4 because they involve multiple cell types. There's lower grade gliomas like astrocytomas and the other ones diffuse astrocytomas and oligodendrogliomas and so on. They occur in one cell type, but they can progress into glioblastoma and affect other cell types. And so they're considered, they're graded at a lower stage. So they're like grade 1 or 2 or 3. And then a glioblastoma multiforme that incorporates all of those cells is considered a grade 4.
So I know in other forms of cancer, staging implies if there's metastasis or kind of how aggressive it is. Is that really the same thing here?
Yeah, so it is. And it also implies genetics, which is interesting.
All right.
So these cancers have one benefit, they have a high percentage of what we call MGMT promoter methylation. And we'll talk about MGMT, but MGMT is a DNA repair gene that affects damage done by chemotherapy. So when you have this methylation, that means that's an epigenetic control of the gene. So promoter methylation basically shuts off the gene from functioning. And so in people that have this promoter methylation, they respond really well to certain types of alkylating agents, chemotherapy, where other people don't, because this gene can repair the damage done by these drugs. So in secondary, they have a really high percentage of this MGMT methylation. They also have a lot of mutations in a set of genes called IDH1 and 2. They happen about 70-80% of lower grade gliomas and secondary gliomas.
Okay.
So why is this important? Well, the incidence rate of low grade gliomas and these other lower grade cancers is 2 to 3 times higher than secondary glioblastomas. And so basically, what that means is that there's a tendency for these secondary brain tumors to kill the patient before they develop into a full-blown glioblastoma.
Oh, so they're quite aggressive.
Yes, they are.
Okay, so far we've got 2 different types of glioblastoma multiforme.
Yeah.
We have the primary type, which typically comes on later in life, and that's most people. You said 90%, kind of, it's later on in life.
Yes.
And then there's the secondary type, which typically starts when you're quite young, prior to puberty. You might stop for a while, but you definitely notice it before you hit 50.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous. This is one that you don't necessarily, at least historically, live that long with.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you for watching Cetome TV. Subscribe below and stay informed.